Hi, everyone. Welcome to the It's All for Love podcast. I'm Cheryl Mazza, the healing dancer, your host. This podcast is all about Michael Jackson and how he continues to spread love in our world and inspires us to live our best lives. Thank you so much for watching and or listening to this episode. But before we get to the episode, I have a few things that I want to tell you. If you are watching this podcast on YouTube, please make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel and also like the video of the episode that you are watching. And I would also love it if you would leave us some comments about how much you loved the episode. If you are listening on any other podcast platform, if you are able to, please subscribe on that platform. And also, what would really help me is if you would leave a review on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. The reviews help the podcast to be more seen and to spread the word to other Michael Jackson fans about the podcast. And as always, I am looking for guests to be on the podcast. So if you would like to be a guest on this podcast and tell your Michael Jackson story, I would absolutely love to chat with you. Make sure to check out the show notes and find the link to click on to schedule a coffee chat with me, or you can email me. The email address is also in the show notes. Thank you again for listening and or watching It's All for Love. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the It's All for Love podcast. I'm Cheryl Mazza, the healing dancer, your host. And today we have Andy Smith from south of England. Andy grew up in Scotland and he struggled with alcohol addiction for most of his life. And inspiration comes from strange places sometimes. And Andy's going to tell us about his story and how Michael inspired him. So welcome, Andy, to the podcast.
Hey, thank you. Absolutely lovely to be here, and what a lovely theme that you have for this, because this is so relevant to my journey. And yeah, and I guess as you kind of describe me, I live in the south of England now in the UK, near London, but I actually grew up in actually the most remote part of the UK, the Shetland Islands, which is right off to the north, kind of on the way towards Iceland almost. And yeah, I grew up in a small island, 7 miles by 3, with 300 people on it. And yeah, as you say, alcohol was a big part of my life, and a lot of that was kind of formed, I think, in my early years with maybe not a lot to do and things like that. So it's been quite a journey. But yeah, Michael was a real turning point for me, in terms of something that was a lifelong battle. And it's interesting, isn't it, how music can sometimes just cut through and make things land a little bit differently, I guess.
Yes, I'm excited for you to tell your story. I think that a lot of people will be able to draw inspiration from your story.
Well, I mean, the yeah, so I mean, I guess kind of let's go back to where it all began.
Yeah.
When I was a young lad, growing up, I mean, an amazing place to grow up, the Shetland Islands. You're out, you can, I remember as a kid sitting on a little pier next to my house, with a bunch of seals around me, wild seals, and just sitting there looking at them and talking to them and things. And you think, wow, that's quite an exceptional place to grow up. Lots of wildlife, lots of things to do in terms of spend lots of times messing around in boats and fishing and just living that kind of outdoor lifestyle. Um, but the kind of downside to it, given that there were no cinemas and we had one TV channel,
Mhm.
you had to kind of make your own entertainment, and a lot of the sort of the social life revolved around alcohol. Well, I actually grew up in a bar. We bought a big old house and turned it into a guest house and a pub on the island. And so our very livelihood was dependent on people consuming alcohol in our house. And I really kind of can see now that that really just sort of seeped into me psychologically.
Mm.
And actually growing up as a young man, you kind of felt the way that you gave yourself kind of meaning, the way you sort of defined yourself was by how much you could drink. You were judged harshly if you couldn't had your drink, as they would say up there. But if you could sit and drink, a bottle of whiskey or whatever, then you were considered to be a man. And I kind of carried this sort of psychological framework all the way sort of through my life, as it were, in terms of went away to university, party, party, party. That was great. Alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. And then I started a corporate career, and I was very successful. I gradually worked my way up through the healthcare industry. I ran veterinary companies, pharmaceutical companies, dentistry companies, and but all the while it was underpinned by this really unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And I tried what I considered to be everything. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to see my doctor. I went to hypnotherapy. I tried all the things that you would consider to be the kind of conventional ways to try and sort this. And I battled this for decades. I was a father of three. I'd had one marriage that had failed. I was in a new relationship, new young son, and I just turned 50, and I was really struggling with the drinking. And it had got to the point where I was drinking perhaps up to a liter of spirits in one go, and all the time hating myself for this. And there was a couple of things that happened. One, I had a huge panic attack and I collapsed in my local supermarket. And I remember I I fell into one of the fridges, literally amongst all the bacon and the sausages and all this kind of stuff. And this lovely little old lady kind of helped me up and was asking me if I'm okay. And I was like, yeah, 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 I'm fine, I'm fine. I just slipped. And all the time I'm thinking, I am not fine at all. And I just felt devastated, full of despair and self-loathing. And anyway, I got myself back to my feet, went around my day, and I was just thinking around, this is not right what I'm doing. I'm killing myself here. And I assumed that nothing was going to help me. I just felt completely unfixable. And a few days later, I was running late for a meeting in a car. And um, I was coming up the part of the route where I would go and get on the motorway, the freeway, takes me past the railway crossing with the automatic barriers and things. And I was driving along and I could see the lights starting to flash, which indicated that the barriers were going to come down. And I was running late, so I started to floor the accelerator. And as I got closer, I realized I'm not going to make this. I'm not going to beat these barriers. I'm going to get hit by a train at this rate. And so I screeched to a halt right in front of these barriers as they came down. And my heart is, you know what it's like when something like that happens,
Yeah.
your heart's banging away out your chest. And I just thought, wow, this is crazy what I'm doing here. And then the man in the mirror came on the radio, and I was sitting there sort of stewing and fuming that I was getting held up. I was already late. And like most of us, I've heard that song hundreds of times before. And just there was something about that day, given what had happened in the supermarket, given how I was feeling in that moment. I think also the fact that I was in my car and looking at myself in the rearview mirror with the bloodshot eyes, the dark circles under my eyes, and that first line of the chorus, I'm starting with the man in the mirror and I'm asking him to change his ways. And I mean, I have deconstructed that song so many times when I understand the impact that it had on me. But it was just really interesting in that moment. I was kind of forced to really listen to the lyrics in a different way. And that sentiment, that one word of asking, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. And I'd spent years blaming my circumstances. I'd kidded myself that in order to be successful, I had to drink to relax and all this kind of stuff. I'd literally written it off as the kind of the price of success. And yet I hated it. And I think anybody who's been addicted to anything will understand that there's very little joy that comes from it. You're kind of telling yourself that today's going to be different, and it's not, and
Mm.
that's crushing to your self-esteem and your sense of self-worth. And there was just something about that message. I'm starting with the man in the mirror, and I'm asking him to change his ways. And I literally looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, and I asked the question, are you up for this? Are you willing to do what it takes to actually change? And it was almost like somebody else answered back, this kind of reflected version of me that went, yeah, I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes. And and that was a really profound moment, life changing. And it set me off on a voyage of discovery to think about, well, what does changing my ways look like? And if I ask the man in the mirror, what answers might I get? And and so I called my boss and I said, look, I'm not feeling well. I'm gonna take a few days off and rest up. And um because I just knew that this was important. It was a moment that I needed to kind of run with. It's like on a football field, you get past the ball, you got to just go. These opportunities don't come around, and I could feel something was different. And my life was so ironic in that I was so successful in changing how other people felt about things, and yet I couldn't do it to myself. And what that Michael Jackson song did was it was like a key in a lock to just unlock me. And I went home, I got all of my old selling and influencing course materials. I'd done a lot of personal development work around mindfulness and things like that. I pulled it all out of the bottom of old cupboards and things like that, and put it in the car. And I drove down to there's a little lake near where I live, and there's a lovely car park overlooking the thing. And I said, right, okay, the answers are here somewhere. I just need to find them and in a way that makes sense for me. And and so I spread everything out over the dashboard, over the seats, and I started that, to answer that question. I'm asking him to change his ways. And it was like, what do I need to do? What is it I've been missing? And and so I started to kind of almost have a bit of an out of body experience where it was, okay, if I'm so good at changing how other people feel about things, what would I do if somebody came to me asking for help with this? And it
Mm.
completely reframed how I was looking at this. And so I started to map out a bit of a process about, well, I would start with this, then we'd do a bit of that, and then we'd certainly reinforce that with a bit of this. And then in order to make it sustainable, we'd finish with that. So yeah, I mapped out what was basically a 7-step process and just worked my way through it. And bit by bit, I could start to feel things starting to shift. And I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. And I remember going back to Louise, my partner, and I said, there's something's happened here. I feel differently, and I can't quite put my finger on it. And actually, everything I've learned now about the subconscious mind is this is how it works. It's that subconscious feeling that actually drives all of our behaviors. And if you think about a lot of Michael Jackson's messaging about love and things like that, um, it is very much, at that kind of core driver kind of level. If you are a being of love, if you care for other people, then that's you in your purest intent. Or if you're somebody who is acting out of fear, then, and we see a lot of that in the world just now, you behave very differently. And so I went back and I said to Louise, said, this is different. And I think if anybody has lived with anybody or been around anybody who's struggled with addiction, it you kind of lose a bit of hope. You lose a bit of faith in them that maybe they'll ever do it. Promises are made and then those promises are broken. And she said, okay, great, good, yes, but was very qualified in her sort of response to it. And I felt a little angry about that because I was kind of like, hang on a minute, I've had this massive epiphany, with this Michael Jackson song and things like that. But she can't reach inside my head. She doesn't know how I'm feeling. Um, but she just said, good, I'm really pleased. Well, let's see how it goes. And then days turned into a few weeks, and I started to feel stronger. I started to feel better
Mhm.
because I wasn't poisoning myself every day. And then things just snowballed from there. I started to get my health back. I started to get my self-esteem back. I've gone on to do amazing stuff now for charity on my bike. I've ridden the course of the Tour de France for disadvantaged children. I've even ridden my bike to Everest Base Camp. In January, I rode across the Arctic, and all the while, sort of raising money for good causes that I feel passionate about. And sometimes people say, "Oh, you're a lovely guy, and you're very altruistic about this stuff." And I'm like, actually, I'm quite selfish about this stuff because I'm doing these things which are almost like an antidote to the amount of self-loathing that I used to feel for so many years. So
Mhm.
now I choose to prioritize the things that make me feel good. And I get quite a big kick out of, doing something that, spreads a bit of love in the world, and things like that. And so, and I now help other people with my with addiction issues, and I get to see the most wonderful transformations in people's lives. And it would be churlish that, sometimes people say, "What has it got you sober?" And I say, "Well, you're not going to believe it if I told you it was the Michael Jackson song, 'The Man in the Mirror.'" And and they're like, "Oh, okay, maybe I need to go and listen to that song." And I'm like, "No, it doesn't quite work like that. You've got to be ready to receive it in a certain way." I'd heard that song hundreds and hundreds of times before, you know, from the early 80s. Michael Jackson he was there, the king of pop, as it says on your shirt. And kind of omnipresent around, but it wasn't until that day that his musical creations were able to kind of reach out to me and give me the inspiration and the hope that I needed. But the journey is about self-discovery. And I think the man in the mirror of itself is a very powerful exercise. When I'm doing guided visualizations with people, we talk about future selves and things like that, and that ability to look at yourself from the outside almost, or see where you're going in life and things like that. It is such a powerful tool. And I think probably a lot of the kind of the messaging in that song and other songs, people didn't really, some people did, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people didn't really understand the significance
Right.
of, self-love, about, acting with from a position of good intent. And yeah, it's just funny how certain moments can just change everything. And sometimes those things can be really bad. Some bad stuff happens and you never look at, your life the same way again. And, I was so grateful that my epiphany, which came off the back of that terrible situation in the supermarket where I literally thought I was going to die.
Mhm.
My heart rate was hammering out my chest, and I felt like my skin was on fire, and I thought, wow, this is how it ends here. Remember that moment, even though it's 8 years ago now. Remember it like it was yesterday. And then on the back of that, when I was starting to ask different questions, the answers came. It's like the old saying, isn't it? That the when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I didn't realize who my teacher was going to be.
Such an amazing story. A lot of the times when you were talking, I was getting choked up. I wanted to cry because it's like I it I just because Michael shows up in everybody's life when it's the right time. That's the gist of me like talking to other people, that are fans or have been fans.
Yeah,
And there's even people that didn't like discover him as I call it until later in life,
yeah,
because it's almost like a spiritual thing. Like he just comes to you when you need it and when you're ready to receive it.
yeah. And I wouldn't probably have classed myself as a fan. Never saw him live, never met him. But I bought Thriller in the early
Yeah.
80s. The music was just always a kind of almost like the soundtrack of my life in a way. And that thing just kind of bubbling up, just yeah, to that moment back in 2017. Bang, pop. There it
Yeah.
went. The king of pop. It was literally my life went pop in that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
And everything changed. And you get to these moments in your life where nothing is ever the same again. You can't ever look at anything with the same eyes because your perspective shifts. And that's what he did for me. And I'll always be eternally grateful.
Has he shown up in your life at all since then?
Um, I think it's made me appreciate the sentiment in the music more.
Mm.
I think obviously there was a lot of his stuff was quite misunderstood, I think, at the time. Or perhaps the depth of it was not fully appreciated. And I find when I listen to his music now, I feel a kind of more of a resonance with him and his spirit. So you kind of, yeah, I find myself looking for messages
Mm.
in some of the lyrics and things like that, and how can I interpret that, maybe a little bit differently to how I used to. I can't say I've had another man in the mirror type
Mm.
life-changing moment, but it's kind of strangely comforting, I would say, to just have a positive narrative, I guess,
Yeah.
to just feel a degree of comfort with.
What do you want the world to know about Michael Jackson?
I think just, love takes many forms. And I think, a lot of people didn't understand the kind of the purity of his intent. I think um when you operate in an environment like he did, when you know how he grew up and the kind of the way he was treated, and also that that kind of slightly rarefied atmosphere that global megastars get themselves into. It's a kind of a not representative of how a lot of us live, but I
Mhm.
think he still came back to that core thing of you know and so many musicians, love is all there is, love is all around. I think just that kind of unifying message, it's the one thing that we all have in common, and that and fear. And a lot of people are playing the fear game, and that is also seductive. And I think it sometimes takes a bit of courage to love
Yeah,
and to be loved and to accept love. And yeah, and I think over time, I think that will definitely be his legacy to the world.
definitely. I agree. Thank you so much, Andy, for telling us your story and sharing with us.
My
It's so
absolute pleasure.
inspirational. Yes. Thank you so much. And that's it for now.
Great stuff.
Have an
Lovely
amazing
to see
day,
you again.
everybody. What was that?
Lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you too. I hope you all have a great day. It's all for love, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.